On the program tonight, Ottawa announces more financial aid for businesses hurt by the pandemic, including the long-awaited successor to its commercial rent relief program. We'll hear from the minister responsible for small business, and we'll get reaction from a group representing business owners across the country. Ontario Premier Doug Ford reimposes restrictions on bars and restaurants in hotspots around the province. And our journalist panel will look at today's announcements and the difficult choices Canadian politicians are having to make between public safety and economic hardship. But we start tonight with that announcement from the Trudeau government of new financial aid for small and medium-sized businesses, as more and more of them are being forced to close again, especially in parts of Quebec and Ontario. The assistance package includes a successor to the less than successful Commercial Rent Assistance Program, which expired last month. This time around, the Prime Minister says the government got the message from those who weren't helped by the previous program.
But as we've seen, this second wave requires more targeted help that flows differently. And we heard clearly from tenants who were frustrated or had landlords who weren't able to participate in the original program. So we made modifications and are coming forward with a support program directly for tenants in commercial businesses.
Well, joining me now to talk about the federal government's new financial aid is Mary Ng. She's a Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade. Minister Ng, thanks for joining us.
Terrific to be here with you, Martin.
Okay, you have heard, this is no secret to you, you've been promising the successor to the Commercial Rent Assistance Program. You've been promising this for weeks. We now have its new successor. You've heard the complaints. The government's been promising a better program. How will this program work better than the other one, which we will all agree was not the success that we had hoped, or you had hoped?
Well, today's program, you heard from the Deputy Prime Minister earlier, which I am very pleased to share with your viewers. It's the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. And what this is direct support to the small business tenant who needs the support. It's targeted. And I believe that this is in response to very much what we heard directly from businesses and from entrepreneurs very directly. And when I say it's targeted, it means that if you are a hard-hit business and you have seen a revenue decline of 70% or more, you will get 65%. But if you are seeing a revenue decline of less than that, then you will get support that is commensurate with your decline.
So you don't have what a lot of small businesses complained about, the cliff, that if you didn't have an incredible 70% loss, you didn't qualify for the program under one of its incarnations. One question I have is, why did it take so long to fix this program? I mean, from the very beginning, small and medium-sized businesses were screaming murder, and they were saying, we can't have it go through commercial landlords, and they seem to have been borne out because there was so little uptake on it by landlords. Why did it take so long to change the program?
Well, we have been working and committed to working with businesses all the way through and listening to businesses. And I think today's program is very much in response to this. I also want to remind viewers that the commercial rent is an area of responsibility for the provinces. But for us, it really is about working together so that we can get the right support out there for businesses. And so the first version, of course, did have more involvement, more involvement through the landlords. But I'm really pleased that today what we're able to do, listening to businesses, is that we are going to introduce a emergency rent subsidy that will help them. And for those businesses who are also harder hit, and harder hit in their fight against COVID-19, where they may see a temporary shutdown due to a public health order, we are going to provide an additional 25% for those businesses. So in addition to the rent subsidy, an additional 25%. So for the hardest hit business, if they are subject to a public health closure in their area to fight COVID-19, that business could get 90% of rent subsidy for a period of time.
Okay, how long, when will this be set up? How long will it be before this will be up and running and small business owners can actually see cash flowing to them if they apply for it?
Well, I want to assure businesses that we are going to provide retroactivity for those who are currently enrolled in the CECRA program back to September so that they can be assured that they will have that coverage. We will be introducing legislation very soon to make the rent subsidy program available to our small businesses. And we're going to do that as fast as we can, working as hard as we can, because we know how important this support is for businesses who need it across the country.
How long will the program run? One of the complaints for small business was that they were sort of living month by month, week by week. How long is this program scheduled to run?
We are going to have it run until next summer. And I think this, again, is to respond to businesses who want to understand that these supports are there in a time period that allows them to plan. And remember, I mean, these supports that we're announcing today are targeted, and they're targeted for those who need it. Those who are harder hit will get more support. Those that aren't as hard hit will get less support. It's intended to provide that scalability so that we are really helping businesses bridge through COVID-19 and get to the other side so that we are better primed for recovery.
You also announced changes to two other programs in addition to this new rent supplement. I believe it's the wage subsidy and the CEBA, the Commercial Emergency Business Account, a Canadian Emergency Business Account. What are those changes, and how will small and medium-sized businesses be able to avail themselves of that?
Well, we always heard right from the very beginning of this that businesses needed three very key things. They needed some help to pay to keep their employees on payroll, which is why we introduced the wage subsidy. That is going to extend until the summer of 2021 so that businesses can be assured that they've got that support to keep their people on their payroll or hire back the ones that they may have had to lay off. Number two, we just talked about it, which is the fixed cost like rent, and then of course having some liquidity so that you can draw on that. And this is the CEBA loan, the Canada Emergency Business Account. We are adding another $20,000 to the existing $40,000 of CEBA. $10,000 of this 20 is forgivable. And here again, I would say that this is targeted support. It is intended for those businesses who have seen a decline as a result of COVID-19, continue to, and they'll have to attest to that. We want to make sure that this additional liquidity support is there for businesses. So an additional $20,000, $10,000 of that forgivable. On
this new rent subsidy, last question. One of the things everyone knows, it's not a secret, how unsuccessful the previous program was. It was only a fraction of the amount that you had hoped to disperse and give out to help small and medium-sized businesses was actually dispersed. I think it was about a third. How much are you budgeting for this program, and how much are you hoping in terms of percentage of small businesses will be able to avail themselves of it? Well, the program is designed so that those businesses who are not seeing their revenue come back as they would expect it during COVID-19 to get the support for that fixed cost and rent. We saw 130,000 businesses getting that rent support under the previous program. That helped to support about 1 million, just a little over about 1 million to jobs in the country through that rent support. So this program here is really intended to help those businesses who are continuing to see a revenue decline, who need that support for this fixed cost, and who will get access to the emergency rent subsidy. Okay, Minister Mary Ng, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you so very much, Martin. Lovely to talk to you today. One of the reasons that many more small and medium-sized business owners may be seeking that rent relief is today's announcement by Ontario Premier Doug Ford that he is reimposing restrictions in 3 regions of the province. Again, closing down inside service in bars and restaurants and further limiting other public gathering spots such as gyms, cinemas, and banquet halls. Ontario again set records for coronavirus infections in the province with 939 new cases in 24 hours. Here's Premier Ford announcing the new measures today.
If current trends continue, Ontario ICU intensive care units admissions are predicted to more than triple in less than 30 days. Our hospitals will be overwhelmed, and we can't let this happen. Friends, we have to do everything possible to avoid widespread lockdowns, and we cannot go back to stage one. We need to keep our schools open and protect our long-term care homes. That's our top priority. Nothing matters more. We need to play the long game by making difficult decisions now. We can flatten the second wave. We can get the economy back stronger and sooner. So I convened my cabinet this morning to review the new recommendations from our health experts.
Joining me now to look at the closures in Ontario and Quebec and the announcement of the new emergency rent subsidy program and how it will affect small business, the community of small businesses, I'm joined by Laura Jones. She's the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and she's joining us from Vancouver. Ms. Jones, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having CFIB on the show.
Okay, question. I mean, you have been so actively involved in lobbying the government in all of these matters concerning small and medium-sized businesses. What do you make of the new announcement with this new rent subsidy program?
Well, I think finally we have some good news with respect to rent relief for businesses across Canada. And the new program checks a lot of the boxes, a lot of the things we were looking for. First of all, the program is going to run through next June. And we were, wanting to move away from this month-to-month uncertainty and, with businesses waiting to hear what was happening with rent relief, right, and only hearing either right before or right after the first of the month. That was problematic. The second thing is it's a sliding scale now, so for your revenue loss. So there's not this big cliff that to qualify you have to have a 70% revenue loss. Okay. You will qualify for more rent relief the higher your revenue losses are, so that was good news. But probably the biggest thing is taking landlords out of the equation. So the rent relief program will be simpler and will go directly to tenants. And that was a really big challenge with the previous program. So it checks a lot of the boxes for us, and on the rent relief side, I think we're pretty happy with what the government's decided to do. Not perfect, nothing's perfect. A few things that are challenging, including we were hoping that there would be some relief for going backwards for those who had been shut out of the previous program. But all things considered, a pretty good program going forward.
I have to ask you, one of the things that your organization and several other business organizations pointed out was how few small and medium-sized businesses who potentially could have availed themselves of rent assistance actually qualified or actually received it under the previous program. What was the percentage of the previous program, which was relatively unsuccessful, and what would you hope it would be in this new program?
Well, we know that there were a lot of businesses who were shut out of the previous program because their landlord either wasn't in a position to apply or chose not to apply for the program. We don't know the exact numbers of that, but we do know in terms of the amount of the funding that was allocated versus what was spent. It was around the halfway mark was the latest official numbers that we saw. So there were a lot of businesses that were shut out of the program.
What do you make of the other measures? There was also an announcement about the salary supplement, salary subsidy, the wage subsidy, and there was also an announcement about CEBA, the Canadian Emergency Business Account. Your reaction to those measures?
So we know there were a lot of businesses that were worried about the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the amounts being lowered, and so I think it's good news that the amount is frozen. Whether perhaps that amount should be increased is something that we might want to look at. So we'll be looking at our member reaction to what's going on with the wage subsidy piece. On the Canada Emergency Business Account, we've also been calling for some additional money in forgivable money for that account. So the loan has been increased by $20,000 and the forgivable portion has been increased by another $10,000. I think that will be very helpful, particularly because on the rent side, that program's not going to be open until November for you to apply for your October rent. So we're going to need something to bridge a lot of businesses through until then, and hopefully that Canada Emergency Business Account will be available sooner, and so that will be very helpful.
Reflections. This week we saw a strengthening and deepening of restrictions in Quebec. The red zone now extends all the way from Montreal to Quebec City, but now today we see the announcement in Ontario as well as closures of indoor dining for restaurants and bars, and it's going to affect gyms and cinemas and casinos. A lot of businesses are going to be affected by the announcement out of Ontario. Your reaction to today's additional closures and restrictions?
Well, so difficult for those businesses, and the blow is softened a little bit by some of the new announcements about relief being available and extra money being available for those businesses that have been forced to close again. But it's still a very big blow. And we know the number one concern of small businesses right across Canada right now is uncertainty about this second wave and how that will affect their business. Business just is not going into the second wave with the same resilience that they went into the first wave. So there's no question that's going to be difficult. I was in Toronto earlier this week. I think about the food court business owner that we talked to who said under normal times he would be serving 250 customers a day. As he was able to reopen, that was 20. He was back up to 20 customers a day. But now with fears of a second wave, that was down to 10, and just incredibly difficult for those businesses. And of course, he'll have to shut down with this new announcement. So really, really challenging. And I think we need to do everything we can to help bridge those businesses back to recovery and pay close attention to what's happening with those businesses in that hardest hit category.
A lot of provincial governments have announced some aid as well. I think Ontario was announcing $300 million today. I know Quebec announced some. Are they also bellying up to the bar in terms of immediate help for businesses who are immediately affected?
Yeah, so Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia opened its applications today for its program, and I think the provinces are starting to come up behind, how do we bridge these businesses that have been forced to shut down because of the pandemic or have really suffered significant revenue losses? How do we bridge as many of them back to recovery as possible? I think that's going to be a really important piece of the recovery going forward, that the provinces step up, get involved, and let's make sure their programs work for businesses, and like the federal programs, are adapted and tweaked where they're not working. I think that's going to be critical.
Last question. I know at the beginning, in the first wave, you and the president of the organization of CFIB, you stressed that a lot of the large surface stores of this world, the Walmarts, the Costcos and all that, they were allowed to continue to operate even during the closures. The secret to helping small and medium-sized businesses who are in the retail sector or the service sector patronize the small businesses?
First of all, I think you're making a really important point. And those giant online retailers and the big box stores are doing just fine. Actually, a lot of the retail data looks pretty good, but it's partly because those retailers are doing well. Small retailers are not doing fine. Only 30% are back to normal revenue. So please make that extra effort to think about Small Business Everyday. We've got a great website, smallbusinesseveryday.ca, that has profiles the campaigns to support small business. Make that extra effort to find them online, to do curbside, to do whatever works for you to support those local businesses. Your business matters a lot to them all the time, but right now it's critical to their survival.
Okay, Laura Jones of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, thanks very much for speaking with us.
Thanks so much.
We're at a tipping point in this pandemic. Not only is the second wave underway, yesterday we hit the highest daily recorded cases, well above what we saw this spring. I know this is discouraging, especially going into Thanksgiving weekend. But remember this, when things were at their bleakest during the first wave, Canadians pulled together and flattened the curve.
Well, to look at what has been an eventful week, ending with some very significant announcements, I'm joined now by three journalists. Catherine Lévesque is a reporter with La Presse Canadienne. Alex Boutilier is a national political reporter with the Toronto Star. And joining us from Toronto is Laura Stone. She's the Globe and Mail's reporter covering Ontario politics at Queen's Park. All three of you, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Okay, let's start with Catherine. I'll start with you in Ottawa watching this press conference. It was a substantial press conference today, a very long one, many ministers, a lot of content. Your reaction to the economic aid? We saw the successor to the rent subsidy, a relatively unsuccessful program that expired last September, at the end of September. We saw its successor announced today. What do you make of it?
one word, finally. The main criticism, I would say, of that program is the fact that all this money was going to the landlords and not to the businesses directly who desperately needed that money. So what we would see was landlords not wanting to go to this program and use it, or we would see criteria that was way too difficult to attain for businesses who would want to reopen and everything. They had to not get any 70% of their revenues for 3 months. So that, really it wasn't used enough. So what the government did today was actually a step in the right direction, is that it just enlarged the program, and the money will be going directly to the businesses who desperately need the money. So I think it's a good step in the right direction. And of course, all this information, right, is coming, on the beginning of a long weekend. And it was a very long press conference indeed, almost 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things, though, too, is one could suggest that maybe the Prime Minister was thinking that this will give people to talk about comforting news, if you will, new programs to talk about over Thanksgiving dinners or whatever. Laura, you've been in Toronto. It's been a really eventful week as well. You and your colleagues were grilling the Premier, Doug Ford, all week long about when the measures that he announced today were finally going to come, with the figures, the COVID-19 numbers going up and up and up. What's it been like, and how difficult has it been for the Premier?
Well, this has been a real roller coaster of emotions in Ontario this week, Martin. I mean, we had the Premier earlier this week defending restaurants and bars, saying there's only a few bad apples in Toronto who are the cause of outbreaks, and he wouldn't be closing down indoor dining despite the calls from Toronto's medical officer of health to do so. Cut to today, where his government and his cabinet approved widespread measures in Toronto, Ottawa, and Peel region, just west of the city. Everything from indoor dining to casinos to gyms to limiting gatherings. Weddings are going to be limited now. It's a really widespread set of restrictions and closures. And you saw a very rattled Premier Ford at his press conference today. He looked like he really didn't want to do this, but he'd seen numbers from the top doctors and numbers and hospitalizations that clearly spooked him. The big question for the Premier, though, is why he didn't do this earlier if the modeling had predicted exactly what we're seeing now, which is upwards of 900 to 1,000 cases predicted by the middle of October.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because as you say, earlier this week, he was adamantly saying, show me the data, show me the data. And that was at the beginning of the week. And obviously in that famous meeting and the briefing yesterday and today with the minister and his public health officials, they showed him the data. Catherine, I want to segue to you, because obviously you pay a lot of attention to the Quebec Premier. I mean, Quebec has, yesterday extended further. I mean, a huge swath of the province is now in this red alert zone with very, very stringent measures. We have a situation in Quebec where tracking is not working. Montreal has given up on a lot of the tracking. They're asking people to phone their own contacts if they test positive. But we also saw reports of Quebec, or especially Montreal, health officials rebutting federal StatsCan officials who've been freed up to help the Quebec. How are things going in Quebec? It doesn't sound as if things are going very smoothly there.
No, I think things are difficult in Ontario, but also in Quebec. And yes, surprising news this week, because I remember clearly Prime Minister Justin Trudeau telling, I think it was in May or in June, but telling the provinces, look, we have people to help you. We have employees from Statistics Canada. They can help do the contact tracing. Just ask us, and we will give you these thousands of people. Obviously, Quebec did not use them, and now they're stuck in a situation where there were some news reports this week saying that they only used a few hundred of those employees, of those federal employees, and now we're stuck in the situation where simply Montreal can't keep up and the whole province cannot keep up. And people are just starting to use this, the COVID alert app. So we're in a difficult situation in Quebec, and I think that has to do with the provincial government saying, having this attitude of, well, we can just manage by ourselves and we can do all of this contact tracing by our own means, obviously they cannot keep up. So they kind of have to take a step forward actually today, and they have to admit that they did it all wrong. They did not see this big wave coming, and now they're stuck scrambling and telling everyone to download the COVID Alert app, but also to contact everyone and to ask Ottawa to help them out on this point where they already had the help, actually.
Okay, Alex, I want to ask you, what are you watching for? Because, I mean, there's so much in this issue. Every week we end up talking about really the only one issue, and that is the government's response to COVID-19. What are you watching for next week, as Parliament's off next week, but over the next coming days and weeks?
Yeah, there's an interesting question to the Prime Minister today at his press conference, and it was about when the feds will step in with more sort of extreme measures, or if they would consider that. Remember, we talked in the spring about the potential of the Emergency Measures Act, the feds actually telling the provinces what to do. The Prime Minister definitely doesn't want to go there, but with cases spiking, up to the thousands per day in Ontario and Quebec, I think it's fair for Canadians to ask, what has to be done in those two provinces to get this under control.
What about, I'm going to throw this out there. I was doing some math and number crunching last night when I saw the numbers out of Alberta. I mean, there are other hot spots as well. We saw, a surprising outbreak in New Brunswick, but we saw Alberta. When you do the adjusting for population, Alberta's figures last night were stunning, and yet they've only announced voluntary measures. Any thoughts, anyone, on that?
Well,
Yeah,
I think we're seeing Go ahead, Alex.
Go ahead, Alex, and then Laura.
I think you saw a bit of that in the press conference today with Deputy Prime Minister Freeland saying they have to move to more targeted measures in the second wave because, as we saw today with Toronto, Ottawa, and the Peel region being shut down or further restrictions being put on them, that's very different than, a restaurant in Halifax or a yoga studio in Vancouver. So I think the second wave's challenge is going to be addressing those regional issues from a national perspective, because ultimately, if cases remain high in Toronto, cases remain high in Montreal, that's trouble for everybody, no matter where you're at.
Okay, Laura, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of public fatigue, too. We've heard here in Ontario, especially problems not understanding the different rules or not quite thinking that they're making a lot of sense. And people having a lot more contacts now than they did back in the second wave, where they maybe had 5 to 10 people who they associated with. Now we're hearing from officials it's up to 50, 75, 100. Kids are back in school and they're seeing their friends again. We know that the government has really hesitated to close them, and they don't want kids to be back at home without being in class and learning and having that peer support. So I think the biggest challenge for governments now is keeping the public on side. I think people have a lot more questions. They're a lot more skeptical of government measures now than they would have been back in the first wave.
Yeah, I think we can all identify with the comment on fatigue and pandemic fatigue, and yet we are still right in the midst of it. I want to thank all three of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Primetime Politics. From all of us here at CPAC, thanks for watching, and have a happy and a safe Thanksgiving weekend.